The Adam Project, Ryan Reynolds time movie. He's a pilot from the future. Movie starts off with, there'll be a couple little spoilers here. I'll tell you straight off the bat that I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was funny, entertaining, kept me engrossed in the movie, decent enough action, good dialogue, good interaction between the characters, a couple plot holes, and I'll tell you those in a second. But overall, thoroughly enjoyed the movie. And if you've got a spare hour, 45 minutes, it's on Netflix, give it a watch. Give it a watch. I think you'll enjoy it. Okay. Now, firstly, we'll talk about the time paradox. So a little bit of a spoiler here. So in the original, well, let me rephrase that. In the remake of the Time Machine movie with Guy Pearce, the head Morlock said to him, the reason you could never save your love was because she was the motivator. Her accident was the reason you built the time machine. If she never had the accident, you would never have built the time machine. So she must always have the accident so that you can build the time machine. That's why he can never save his love. Now that means your motivation from the future to go back to the past, that motivation in the past must always exist. Otherwise, you will never be motivated to go back in the first place. So we keep that in mind to this. Ryan Reynolds ends up in 2022 by mistake, or Adam, as he is in this movie, he's trying to get to 2018. So he has a motivation to go to 2018, but mistakenly ends up in 2022. Going by the Morlock, and the Morlock is correct. If we're going to stay within time paradox correctly, going by the Morlock, that motivation must always exist. For him to come back and remove the motivation does not work. Otherwise, he's not motivated to come back in the first place. So the motivation must always exist for him to come back. And even if he changes his mind to become a different motivation, that only became a motivation based on the first motivation to come back. Okay. So in other words, the motivation must always exist, and whatever he does to try and remove that motivation should always fail. And if we agree that it does, and it should, then this movie is left open for a sequel. And I'll explain that in a minute. Okay. So a couple little plot holes. In the beginning, he is flying. He's been shot and he's flying his ship. Later on, very quickly, we discover he can't even get into his ship through his remote because he's been injured. And the ship says, you're injured. I can't take you. Your DNA's not, your body's not fully intact. Oh, well, that's a bit strange, because how was he in the ship? Oh, well, okay, maybe he got in the ship and before he got anywhere he got shot, or I don't know. But then later on we find he can't even start the ship injured. Once it's started, once he's in it and it's started, then he can be injured and fly it. But if that's the case, then who started it in the very beginning, considering the ship is linked to his DNA? And he didn't have an uninjured DNA to start the ship for him. Or did he get shot while he was in the ship, which would indicate there was a hole in the hull? But then he's flying in space. So how can he fly in space without... Right, so you can see there's a couple little questiony things that don't make a lot of sense. But anyway, if we move on from that, humour's decent. I'm always a little bit dodgy with Ryan Reynolds' humour. He often just goes too much in the gutter for me, but this one was okay. Action, decent. Humour, decent. Dialogue and interaction with other characters, decent. Decent. It seems to be like a little bit of a lower budget movie, but for Netflix, it was a decent movie. I've seen worse that's cost multiple hundreds of millions of dollars that just didn't entertain me at all. Such as The Last Jedi, the garbage that Disney's put out. This was far more entertaining. Okay, so regarding the time paradox, So we do have that. That must always exist. The motivation in the past must always exist. Otherwise, you can't come back in the past to begin with. So if you think you're going to come back from the future to the past and take out the time machine, but that's the technology that you use to come back, then that can't happen. You can, but the technology must always exist for the machine to be created so that you can still come back in the future and take it out in the past. In other words, you will always fail because the motivation must always be there. That's how we can have a sequel going forward. So after that plot device with him being injured in the ship, so that's good. The next biggest flaw for me, now remember, look, it's a science fiction sort of a movie, so we have to suspend our belief in reality. So we have to do that. To me, though, the biggest one was the magnetic shielding on this device, which was glass. Look, you can get things to clean your fish tank. You put one thing on the glass and one on the outside and you move it around and it cleans the side of your fish tank, but the things stay together through the magnets on the side of the fish tank. Now, great, you put them on the other side of the room and they're not going to match, but on the fish tank they were. But if we're talking about something that has such huge magnetic ability that it's going to rip buttons off my shirt, glass ain't going to stop it. Glass isn't going to stop that magnetics coming out. But of course, as soon as there's a hole in the glass, it's like, oh, look, now my shirt buttons are coming off. Like it's some kind of weird vacuum, but only for metal. Now that raised its problem in itself because at no point was his whole shirt going. It also meant no one was wearing belts because no one's pants were going. The rings on fingers weren't getting sucked in. The eyelets on shoes weren't getting sucked in. The metal walkway they were on wasn't getting sucked in. Fire axes and metal fire hoses and things like that weren't getting sucked in. Now, the biggest plot hole of the whole thing was that when they were going to be shot, so a little bit of a spoiler here. So someone's got a gun and they're going to shoot armor-piercing bullets. Now remember, it's mentioned armor-piercing bullets. It's like, stand behind me. Well, it's not going to do any good. They're armor-piercing bullets. I'll just go through you. Oh, well, okay, in that case, doesn't matter. Right. Now, here's where we have the problem. When the bullet comes out of the gun, it does a 90-degree turn because the magnet's over there. The bullet comes out of the barrel and goes over that way, straight away. Now, if that magnet was so strong it could make a bullet do a 90-degree turn, then how come the magnet didn't affect it while the bullet was still attached to the cartridge in the chamber or within the magazine? Even if there was only one in the whole gun and the gun was made of plastic or non-magnetic metal or something. If the magnet can affect the bullet in mid-flight, that extent, then it's certainly strong enough to affect the bullet while it's still within the gun, and it would have pulled the gun over. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit picky or not, but to me, look, that's a major plot hole. Maybe they could have done something to explain it, but I don't know. But for me, that there is no explanation of that. That is a major, major plot hole. But like I said, it's a bit of a sci-fi sort of a thing, so we have to suspend our belief in reality. So overall, I enjoyed the movie. Good humour, good action, good dialogue and interaction with the characters. Look, I thought trying to have a rational discussion with Dad, I thought Dad was over the top not listening. That was my impression. It's like, dude, 2 of your sons have come back to the future to talk with you, and you're just like, no, I'm not listening, and you all need to shut up and go away. Like that just seemed to be a little bit over the top for me. Like, you know what? They didn't risk this time paradox crap just to say, hi, Dad. Can we, play a game of catch or some shit? Like, no. Otherwise, though, Otherwise, though, if we can just ignore those couple little plot holes, I thought the movie was entertaining and it had all those good elements. It certainly doesn't have the $300 million budget that some Hollywood movies have, but it was still far better entertaining than those high Hollywood budget movies. And if you've got a spare hour and 45 minutes in the afternoon or the evening on Netflix, I reckon do yourself a favour and give it a look. I think you'll like it. If you've seen it though, let me know what you think in the comments below.